Hi, this is GeoSpinach, and this is going to be a short video on unit organization and how an army is generally structured. We're not going to get much into detail, and we're going to focus mainly on the Wehrmacht, where I am most familiar with. This is for a general audience that doesn't know how it is structured. If you already served in the military, then probably you already know this. If you don't know this, then that's quite an issue. So let's get into the video. So we have here a general structure. I'm going to go as fast as possible on this. So we have an army group, which is around from 300,000 men to 1 million. And that will constitute, for example, the army group center of the German army. You can have an army, but it depends on the situation. So in World War I, Germany had various armies, but in World War II, it did not, which will constitute around 50 to 300,000 men, and this will imply different divisions, brigades, and so forth. And then you have the corps. The corps constitutes around 20 to 50,000 men. For example, the Russian army tended to have a tank army, but it was mainly in the size of a corps, but they used to call it an army. So it's kind of tedious when you read a lot of military history. You just have to know for each different army how is it structured. Here the structure is purely based on the Wehrmacht around the year of 1942. So a corps can either be constituted of brigades or divisions. Generally, divisions and brigades, as well as infantry regiments, are generally quite autonomous by themselves. So you can put them in a front, and they have their own supply, logistical, signal, engineering platoons, and they have everything to work in theory autonomous. Mainly the infantry divisions and the brigades, but infantry regiments, especially in modern armies, tend to be quite autonomous. During World War I and World War II, that was not necessarily the case in most scenarios. Now, a division is symbolized by this symbol here with the two X's above, a brigade with one X, and a regiment with 3 hours on top. And then an infantry regiment constitutes of 3 infantry battalions of 700 to 800 men, symbolized with 2 arrows on top of it. So an infantry regiment constitutes of 3,000 men. And then you have an infantry company, which it's 150 to 200 men, which is 4 infantry companies below an infantry battalion, and it has that one thing on top of it. And then you have 3 platoons under each infantry company. And then you go below with squads, but we'll not get into that. You also have an artillery regiments, which have 12 artillery pieces per battalion, which you will have around 3, 4, or 5 battalions. You will have a reconnaissance battalion, which will have its own companies of maybe light armored units and so forth. An anti-tank battalion that either will be directly connected with the infantry regiments as a support, or act independently with its own infantry companies. But in most cases, they will be divided up to the infantry regiments and by below them to those infantry regiments. The same applies for engineering companies and infantry gun companies, which will be more specialized using heavy mortars and so forth. You can also have signal corps, medical corps, supply corps, and headquarters and so forth. Now, for a Panzer division, things are practically the same. The only difference is that the symbol for armor is this thing here, and it constitutes of 1 to 2 regiments that has from 100 to 150 tanks each, in total around 200 tanks. Of course, in the late stages of the war, the tanks numbers were all over the roof. They will also have a Panzer Grenadier Regiment, which will be motorized regiments, mainly anti-tank battalions, and all of the extra support units. Now, to show you a very simplistic example of how you apply this on a battle map, now let's imagine that this area has to be defended by a division. Here I have the various descriptions of the terrain, and if we see very specifically the complexity, and that's why in my videos I tend to ignore the regimental, divisional, company, and battalion levels, and I mainly focus on brigades and divisions to show my example, well, is mainly this. The whole thing, it's very complicated. Now, the main idea is that you have your regiment, which in this case, your regiment is here, and your regiment constitutes and connects everything, all of your units. So here is your regiment, okay? Now, your regiment, what it has to do, it has to organize its units. So each regiment will have each of its battalions across a set front. Each battalion will have with each of its companies, and each of its companies, each in its platoon, organized. The main thing outtake I want you to understand here is that not all troops are on the front line. Actually, the majority of troops are not on the front line. You have some troops constantly engaging with the enemy, and you have a lot of troops just barely behind them, and also you have a lot of troops that act as a reserve. That is a very vital thing. And also you have scattered a lot of these support units and anti-tank units, anti-air units, which parenthesis here, anti-air units, you tend to link them up together with artillery battalions if the artillery battalions themselves do not have anti-air companies. If they do, then you put them in more strategic positions to create, as we said in the other video, an umbrella of protection. Now, if I'm going to show you all of the regiments combined for one division, you come to this, which, as you can understand, is a massive and very complex thing. And practically this is what is massive and what is very, very, very complex. In this scenario, we have the two main regiments protecting the right flank and the left flank, and you have a third regiment acting as a reserve on the rear, which will reinforce accordingly. Each unit by itself has its own reserve, its own signal units, its own support units, and could act in theory independently. So the Army Corps could come in and command this regiment, let's call it the 1st Regiment, to retreat from this area and move to the south and protect it, and even though it's part of this whole division. So an Army Corps and an Army Group in general can take regiments away from a division and brigade, but it cannot do so so much when it comes to anything below a regiment. One last thing, a regiment does not fall below a brigade. Some people may confuse that. You don't usually see that. You see a brigade and then you see immediately battalions behind it. Now, that was the video, a very simplistic video on general analysis of organizing troops on the battlefield. If you want to go on the specifics on how to put your forces and where to put them, I'm glad to make a video about it, but I'm not going to do it on the platoon level. Best case scenario, I'm going to do it on the battalion level. As you can see, it's quite a tedious job. Now, thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe and ask any questions you might like. Thank you for watching.